Alright, so in this final lesson, we're going to take a look at how to shade the terrain. Now, before that, I also gave some basic colors to the instances that we have. So I'm just going to turn those on just to show you what I have. Like, I haven't really done anything. I just took two materials, one is green and one is slightly pink, and I assigned them to the flower and the clover, and that's essentially it. So if I just turn on, the rocks are barely seen anyways, so I'm not really bothering about that. But yeah, so if we just render this now, you should at least have some colored vegetation. Yeah, so there you go. So this is, basic, nothing fancy. Okay, so what I want to do is, this being the final thing, we're going to take care of the terrain. So I've hidden everything else for now because it's just, we don't really need it right now. I'll also hide the instances, and I have a second camera. So I'm just going to switch to camera 2, which is like a more aerial shot. So if we render it, we should be able to see it. Now it doesn't switch automatically. So just come in the viewport and you can click and it will switch to that. Now what I'm going to do is our network for the terrain is going to be relatively big. So I'm going to make it in ShopNet because it's easier over there. Now I have an existing material which I had made, but we'll do it in a similar way. Now the height field has certain attributes which we can use. So specifically I want two of them. We want the flow attribute and then the road attribute that we had saved. Okay, so those are the two things that we are going to use in our final setup. And with Redshift, you don't have to do anything because it keeps the attributes to automatic extraction, so you don't need to worry about that. Okay, so what I'll do first of all is we'll just come in here and I'm going to create a Redshift network. We'll call it, let's call it landscape. And we'll come in here and I'll create an RS material. And let me just plug that in. And I'll assign it to the landscape. So yeah, so it should become shiny because this has glossiness to it. I'll just move this around a little bit so we can see a little more. Okay, this is fine. So let's do one thing. The first thing we can do is I want to bring in the flow attribute and the road. Okay, so let's bring those in first of all. So I'll just do RS. You get something called RS user data, which allows you to bring in attributes. So what we want is they're both float. So just take the scalar user data. We'll do control C, control V. I'll call this as flow and I'll call this as road. And let's call this flow. And now when you directly connect it, it doesn't show up. So you need to restart the render. So I'll just plug this in and hit restart. Like just hit the reload button. So you'll be able to see it. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so that's the flow map. And then if you click here and again hit reload, you should have the road. Yeah, see, so we have the road. Okay, so this is done. Now what I'm going to do is we're going to build, we're going to do a little bit of math. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a slope map, like our own slope map. Alright, so the math for it is relatively simple. Okay, so it's essentially, the idea is to take a vector and do a dot product of that with the normal. And then we do a complement of it. Now, if you look at the math of it, it's essentially you do 1 minus dot of, you have your basic vector and the normal. This is essentially what we want to create. And the vector will point in the y direction because that's the slope. Okay, so the vector will be 0, 1, 0. So this is what we are going to generate. Now it sounds complicated, but it's not very complex. So the first thing we need is the normals of our geometry. And the way to get that is you can just take something called as an RS state. And the RS state allows you to bring in a whole bunch of things. So if you come in here, you'll see that you have normals, and I can just connect that to diffuse and you'll see the normals. The second thing we need a vector. So we're just going to create so we can take a vector absolute, which is also fine. And then we can just keep this to 1. So if we look at this, it should give us like green, okay, because it's RGB. So that's what you're getting. And what you do is you take a dot product. So you take an RS dot and plug in this and that. And now this is not going to give you anything, but there you go. Like if you plug this in, you automatically get the slope of your geometry. But in order to do the 1 minus, we can take a subtract. So take a subtract. Yeah, just take an RS sub. And this goes into the second one. The first value is at 1. And we can plug that in. And there you go. So this gives you the slope data that you want. Okay, now how do you control this? So what I usually do is you can take a color correct. So take a color correct and you can bring this into the input. This goes into the output. And what you can do is if you adjust the gamma and the contrast, you get some pretty nice results. So this allows you to see, you can like, if you just want the slopes, or if you just want, or if you wanted to spread out even more, you can adjust it that way. See, so you can kind of see, this allows you to sort of travel. Okay, and then you can also invert it if you want. So of course we don't want it to be this contrasty. The other way to do it is we will keep this, but you can also just do it with a ramp. So if I take an RS ramp and plug that in, so what you can do is you can invert it if you want. See, so we can take this, and which is exactly what I want right now. So the idea here is I want to do two things. I want to create one for the ground. So this will all be green. And then I want to create another map for the cliffs. And then we just want to mix them together. So let's first build this and then we'll build the other thing. Okay, so now that this is done, I want to multiply it with the flow map. Okay, so we'll just take a multiply. And I can multiply it with the flow map. Just hit a reload because it doesn't really keep the attribute in memory. Yeah, so this is what we have. If you want, you can make some basic changes to the flow map using like a change range. Okay, so you can sort of just, make it lighter if you want to. We don't want to do anything right now, but I'm just sort of demonstrating it. Okay, and then let's build a map out of this, a color map. So we'll take another ramp. And so what I want is I just want this to be green. And I want this like to be here. Let's just do one thing. Let's take this to be, slightly higher. Yeah. And then I want this to be slightly brownish. Yeah, like a grayish brown. Yeah, I think this is fine. Okay, now to break this up, what we can do is I can just add a little bit of noise to this. So we'll take a noise map. So take an RS noise. Just plug it in. The first thing is this is a very large landscape. So we'll have to increase the overall scale. Or actually we'll have to decrease it. So get it down to 0.1 and there you go. So you'll start seeing something. Or let's try 0.05. No, I think 0.1 is good enough. And then get the Y scale down to 1. So you'll get a little bit of like stretching over there. And then we can just adjust the complexity. So increase the complexity a little bit, lower the amplitude gain, and you can increase the distortion. Yeah, and then we can just multiply these together. So just take a vector multiply and we can multiply this with that. Yeah, and then let's also just break this up a little bit. So I'm going to just lower this and increase that. See, so you get like these patches that you want. Yeah, let me just get rid of the or like blur the reflection. Yeah, I think that looks nice. Anyway, so this is what we have. But what I want to do is I don't want it to be this much. You can also just increase this. Yeah, so it doesn't break up, like as much. You can also give it some color so it sort of mixes in. Okay, so this is one set. The other one we want to create is for the cliffs. So what I'm going to do is we'll just take the same RS ramp and do Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V. And let's turn off the invert. So what we should have is just the cliffs. And then we can further on just plug this into, like, let's keep that here. We'll plug it into another RS ramp. So we'll call this as cliff color and we can call this as ground color. Yeah, so let's just take this and we'll just assign some basic colors to this. So what I want is this to be, like grayish, and let's make this green because we're going to mix them. So we just want them to sort of like, not have any unnecessary patches in the place. And then I'm going to duplicate the noise here. So just do Control C, Control V, and I'll multiply it with this. So just do a vector multiply and then, multiply it with that. But we can just offset the noise a little bit. So let's just come into coordinates and offset it. So you get a different result. That's all. And we can lower that and increase this. Okay, so now how do you mix these together? So the way to mix it is fairly simple. You will find something called as an RS layer. So just take all of this and we're going to put it through a layer map. So take a layer and this will be the base color. So this comes in here, that goes out there. It'll be black for now because the first layer is black. And then what I do is like, this is the basic ramp that we want for mixing. So let's just call this as mix map. And this comes into the layer 1 mask. So I'm just going to take this and plug it into layer 1 mask. See, so you'll end up seeing this. And there you bring in the layer 1 color. So you'll end up getting that. So this way you can sort of like, we have one set of color for the cliffs and another set of color for, so you can actually do like, if you have high-res textures, you can also mix them this way, so that also works. And then lastly, we want the road. So this I'll keep it fairly simple. So I just want to take layer 3 and I'll turn it on. Let's make it like a light brown or something. And I can just plug in the road. Where's the road? Yeah. I can take the road and plug this into layer 2 mask and hit a reload because it's not going to show up. Yeah, there you go. So there's your road. So this gives you, the overall terrain. Now, as a final thing, I want to create a bump map out of this. And this is where you can be slightly lazy. All right, so my file crashed and this is the original material that I had built. So there might be some, slight changes. The overall pattern is the same. Okay, so we were going to build the bump map. So what we're going to do is firstly, we will desaturate it. So I'll just take a color correct and just put it into input and we'll just desaturate this. So this is like a lazy way of making a bump map. Then you take a bump map. So take an RS bump map and plug this into the input and then plug that into bump. And that's basically it. So if I disconnect this, it doesn't really show up immediately. Let me just zoom in to some place. Yeah, let me go to camera 2 and just zoom in a little bit. Yeah, what you can do is just take the height scale. You can see a little bit, but not a lot. So just take the height and make it about 5 and that will give you, see, there you go. So now you can start seeing something. Like if you come to the cliffs, you'll start seeing a pattern. And that's effectively it. So now we can bring back the color data that we had and this is it. So this is everything that we want. So if I come back to camera 1 and let's just bring everything back so we can see what we have. So let me just turn everything on. So I'm going to turn on the instances and the plants but yeah, while that turns on, so this is essentially it. So this is as far as the entire project is concerned. So I don't know if this is, I don't know how many of you have the old rocket ship training. The idea with this was to try and do a replacement of that, where that one was also, the point was to try and cover as much of Houdini as possible. The only thing I'm not covering anymore is Mantra because I don't use Mantra anymore. And like Redshift is faster, so I usually prefer using that or Octane, depending whichever one I'm using. But as a beginner, the idea was to just, let you go through a massive project that will allow you to use as many of the Houdini tools as possible, so that you get a little more comfortable with it. Like that was the general idea. Okay, so we'll turn on the exhaust and we'll turn on the vellum, which is the dust, and that needs to calculate. So I'll just pause the video for a second while it calculates. Yeah, so this is it. Yeah, I'll just bring back the light blockers as well. Yeah, I think I have everything. Okay, so let me just do a render and that's essentially it. This is as far as the entire project is concerned. The rocket bus has officially taken off. Yeah, so there you go. So this is everything. We have the plants and the rocks and the cliffs and everything in place and the clouds. And this is our final image. So I'm not very good with the Redshift sampling settings. So I'm not really going to get into that. I always get a little confused. But I'm assuming if you're a Redshift user, you'll be slightly better at it than I am. Anyways, this is as far as the entire training is concerned. So if you have, I hope this was useful, like for anybody who's purchased this. I hope the aim that I had is sort of fulfilled, which is to allow you to go through as large a project as possible and as varied a project as possible, where you get to do a ton of things. So even though it's not an animation, you do still get to do a fair bit of visual effects to just build the image. Alright, so this is essentially it. So if you have any questions regarding this training or any of my other trainings, any of the free tutorials that I made, you can ask me on Vimeo or YouTube, or you can write me an email, you can ask me on Twitter, whatever, like anything that you want. I'm also on Instagram, so you can send me a message anywhere. Usually I answer, I guess 80% of the times I answer. So yeah, once again, I hope this was useful, and that's basically it.